How long do you expect to live? Is it even something that you spend any time thinking about? Well, perhaps it's time that you start because there are a whole host of different technologies that are all exploding at the moment, which have the potential to significantly increase not just human lifespan, but also our health span to ensure that we live significantly longer and much healthier lives. Technologies like nanorobotics, AI, brain computer interfaces, and all sorts of others are really starting to explode in a way that we've never seen before in human history. Perhaps the most exciting of all of these is gene therapy, which is to say, directly editing our genes, our DNA. This has the potential to cure all sorts of different diseases and really revolutionize human health. So, to learn more about it this week, I spoke to Anthony from the Gene Investing X page. Anthony is a mathematician, but he's also a very interested investor in many different businesses in this space. So he's got a particular few companies that he's very interested in, but he's got a pretty broad range of knowledge about the space in general and about the science involved. Now, it's important to say that he is not a doctor or a researcher. He doesn't do these techniques himself. He assesses these companies as businesses, but in that regard, he's got a whole wealth of knowledge and is a pretty interesting guy to talk to about the science behind it as well. So I found this conversation super interesting. Anthony's a lovely guy and, of course, incredibly knowledgeable about his passion, which is, of course, gene therapy and investing in those companies. So I hope you enjoy it. Without further delay, here is Anthony from Gene Investing with Anthony. If you are interested in extending your own healthy lifespan, then I can't recommend this week's partners enough. DoNotAge.org is a company dedicated to helping people like you and me extend their health span through supplementation. On the website, you can check out all of the different supplements that they sell, accompanied by a whole section on the science behind them. You can read the links on where they've got their research from, check out the team that's working on it, and of course, pick up those all-important supplements for yourself. So go to the site and use the code CTH for a 10% discount. You can also find the link in the description for this show.
Complete check. Heads.
Hello, friends. I am here with Anthony from @Gene Investing, the X account that talks about investing in a very exciting space in the technological revolution, and I'm super excited to hear more. So, Anthony, thanks so much for joining me. How are you doing?
Great. Thanks for having me. I'm excited.
Awesome. So look, let's get straight into it. I'd love to get a bit of an intro to you, how you got into this field, and yeah, like what's kind of drawn you to the field of investing in gene therapy technology?
Yeah, so I'm pretty much a mathematician by trade. So I've always been good at math and things like that. But in saving, I've always been a saver. But I didn't really get involved with the stock market until I think it was about 2016. And I had a lot of tech stocks at that time, like Apple and Facebook and but I had Nike. I had a lot of different stuff. I was pretty diversified. And then, Tesla came along and I kind of, traded that a few times, but I was like, I'm really waiting for it to get a little cheaper back then. And it hit 30 billion market cap when this is before any stock splits or anything, many years ago.
Yeah.
Well,
I was in on Tesla back in the day as well. Yeah.
Yeah. And it hit like 178, which it was a 30 billion market cap. And now it's like 20x that. It's a lot bigger. And I sent for some money from Robinhood to buy it because it hit exactly kind of where I wanted. But back then, if you didn't like have the Robinhood Gold and stuff like that, I was always too cheap to pay the $5 or $10 a month. It took like 48 hours to like get your money to settle. And the very next day it went up 10% to like 195, which was, 33 billion market cap. And and I still would have had a 20x, but I said, oh, screw it. I don't want to pay 195. I wanted it at 178, and so I drive a Tesla, so I'm reminded of that every day. So, ever since then, I've been like, oh, okay, I got to find the next big thing. And I'm definitely not going to make the same mistake, twice. And that kind of took me to CRISPR was my first stock, the ticker CRSP, the one that just had its first ever CRISPR approval for a medicine for sickle cell disease. It just happened last Friday. And so that was a big deal. The stock's been, real volatile since then, but that was my first one. I'm not in that one anymore just because I've really dove into all the companies and I found two that I like better.
Okay. And so before we get into those, because I do want to talk about the companies that you are most excited about, but first of all, just the space generally, gene therapy, like what is it that grabbed your attention? I mean, and how huge of an opportunity are we kind of looking at as a species right now?
Yeah, I mean, I think what's crazy about biotech is you can, it's been a very tough space over the years, but especially now it's in like a really bad bear market because of interest rates and all of that. But you're starting to have things like artificial intelligence and things that your listeners are probably more, in tune with, really starting to make a difference, not just artificial intelligence, but like base editing, prime editing, these new tools like CRISPR that are really speeding up the ability to find targets, find drugs. It might have took 10 years for something to come to market before. Now it can happen in 5. And when you start speeding up it, all the math changes. You can be much more valuable when you can bring drugs to market quicker and be more successful. Like I expect these things to be a lot more, much higher probability of success.
Yeah. And so just to be clear, CRISPR is a company, but it's also the name of the technology, right? And so just give us a brief, I know you're not a researcher or a doctor, but like just give us a brief kind of intro as to what the technology actually is. What are we talking about here as far as you understand it?
Yeah, CRISPR has been discovered a long time ago, but when about 10 years ago, it was discovered as something that could edit human genes, which was a big deal. It got a few years back, it won a Nobel Prize for that ability. Jennifer Doudna and Emmanuel Charpentier, they shared the Nobel Prize for that. And they've started companies. CRISPR is tied to Emmanuel Charpentier, and then Intellia, Caribou are the two main ones associated with Jennifer Doudna. And basically, it's bacteria and viruses are where they found this. They never thought, they were researching how bacteria defends itself against viruses. And they found out that bacteria like stores, it kind of makes a little cut and it stores a piece of the viral DNA when it attacks it, so that the next time it comes and attacks it, it recognizes it and can defend itself better.
Right.
If that makes sense. So, but then they found, oh, what if we somehow use that for humans and for plants and all these things? And sure enough, they can do it. And that's kind of called like CRISPR 1.0.
Okay.
And then you have people like Dr. David Liu, his lab invented base editing and prime editing, which are like CRISPR 2.0, CRISPR 3.0.
And so base editing, just to be clear, that's the ACT.
Yeah.
Well, I kind of remember. So it's the base pairs in the DNA strands, right?
Yeah, like humans have 3 billion base pairs, and the A's match with T's and the G's match with C's.
Adenine, cytosine, guanine,
thymine.
Yeah.
Yep.
Okay, and so what we're talking about here is editing those.
Yeah, the base editing is really cool, and that's where I have that's one of my two companies is really tied to the base editing, and they can
Okay.
actually change bases without as much cutting and things. The CRISPR 1.0 cuts it, and because of that, it could lead to more. It could be less safe in some instances. But like, I don't know if you're familiar with progeria.
I'm not. No.
Okay, so it's like the Benjamin Button disease.
Okay.
It's if you've ever seen someone young with progeria, they look very old,
Right.
and they tend to live very short, like 10-year. They could live only 10 years old sometimes, I think.
Right.
And that's just, I forget if it's like 1A that's supposed to be a T, or it's just one out of the 3 billion base pairs that we have, just one mistake that causes that.
Mm.
And they've already shown that it can be corrected with base editing. The problem right now is delivery. We've been real successful with like liver diseases because there's things called LMPs that help deliver it, and those LMPs really want to go to the liver. That's kind of where they want to go. And then things like beta thalassemia and sickle cell disease are blood. Those are ex vivo, where they take out the cells and kind of do it in a lab. That's a lot. They've been good at that too. And for cancers like leukemia, you're in the UK.
I am.
So are you familiar with Gosh?
Yes. Great Ormond Street. Yes. Very familiar. Yeah.
Yeah. So they have a really exciting base editing trial that's going on. If anyone on my highlights on my at Gene Investing page on X, one of the stories under my highlights is about Alyssa, who's a girl that had this really bad form of leukemia.
Right.
And she had 3 or 4 different types of treatments that just didn't work. And they tried this base editing, and she's been in remission for over a year.
Wow.
Yeah, and she was on like talk shows, and
Amazing.
I think the video is pretty cool. It's with her and her mom, and they're being interviewed.
And that's at Great Ormond Street. Gosh.
Yeah.
Yeah.
Yep.
So for listeners, Great Ormond Street, for listeners in the US, I'm sure most UK listeners will know it, but for listeners in the US, Great Ormond Street Hospital is probably the most famous children's hospital in the UK, and also the most advanced, as far as I know, in terms of adoption of technology and advanced treatments. It's in central London. It's a very kind of famous children's hospital, basically.
Yeah, they're doing a lot of cool stuff.
Yeah. Awesome. And so you mentioned, so we've discussed base editing. You mentioned, was it Prime as well?
Yeah, that one. There's a company that came out, Prime Medicine.
Okay.
And that also came out of Dr. Liu's lab.
Okay.
And that's
so
like it's like CRISPR 3.0.
Okay.
Prime editing's cool because for base editing, there's transversion edits that you can make, and I'm slipping my mind right now. Transversion and translation, no, I don't know, but I forget the name of it. But basically, prime editing can do a lot more of the types of edits. Like base editing can take care of 30% of all the mutations, like point mutations, and prime editing can do, I think it's like 90%.
Okay. I'm just googling prime editing as we talk. But yeah. So okay, awesome. So essentially, it's just an advancement on the technology. So it utilizes an RNA template. So it's building in PEG RNA.
Yeah.
Anyway, I mean, as I say, I'm aware you're not a scientist, so we don't need to go too deeply into the technology. But yeah, so suffice it to say, it seems like there's lots of advancements in this technology at the moment, and lots of companies that are springing up, taking advantage of the cutting edge of this field.
Yeah, for people interested, on my highlights, I have another video of the CEO of Beam Therapeutics, which is one of my two companies, who he's describing with a nice visual aid base editing, and it shows the three parts that make up base editing.
Okay. Awesome. And so, why is this the area of technology that was most compelling to you?
Well, I think, people are real excited about things like Chat GPT right now, but things like Alphafold are like 100 times more impressive when you think about what it's doing. I mean, anyone can put in a bunch of words into a what do they call it, large language model, or those things, and to me, that's, yeah, some of the stuff's kind of cool. I like some of the image, what do they call it, DALL-E.
Yeah, there's DALL-E,
Yeah,
and there's Midjourney as well.
yeah, those are pretty cool things, but nothing's even close to what it can do in terms of like predicting the structure of proteins. And I mean, that's just amazing, right? But I love the fact that base editing in the past, once you had phase 1 data, you still had a very low percentage of getting that drug all the way to approval. It's just, you're guessing, you're like putting band-aids on medicine, basically. You're not actually curing anything. You're just finding something that kind of masks the problem. And this, we're going like straight to the root of the problem and fixing it. And typically when you show it in phase 1 now, you're not going to be 20% confident that it's going to make it all the way to approval. You're going to be 70% confident.
Right.
So it changes, like I said before, it changes the complete math. Everyone's used to giving 8x multiples on revenue for biotech companies. All those kind of numbers should change once they see, oh, this company continues to succeed on half the drugs and not 10% of the drugs like people are used to.
Yeah. So, I mean, you mentioned a few things there, but you mentioned Alphafold, which is, of course, a project that came out of DeepMind, company that was acquired by Google, run by Demis Hassabis, where they essentially solved this historic problem of protein folding, understanding the architecture, the structure of proteins and how they fold. And the reason that was difficult is because each molecule has a different kind of shape, and the way that those different molecular shapes interact gives you a very particular shape of protein. And that's crucially important because of the fact that proteins are the building blocks of all life, and the ways they interact are the way that the body works, and also crucial to understanding pathogens and diseases. So I wanted to ask you about AI, and particularly AlphaFold, how much of an impact that's likely to have on this space going forward. Like, is AlphaFold as revolutionary as like instinctively I feel like it should be? Is that your impression from what you're reading about the space? Like, is AI really as transformative as we all kind of hope?
So yeah, AlphaFold is by far the most impressive achievement of AI that's come. Like, and it's not even close, really. People are like, oh, they can beat someone in chess, or they can beat someone in the AlphaGo, and those are nothing compared to, like you mentioned, the building blocks of life, the structures. If anyone's seen a protein structure, it's not like Legos. It's not. It's a lot more complicated than calculus. So yeah, it's amazing. And like you said, it's not just the structure oftentimes determines what it's going to do in the body. Like I think you briefly mentioned, it's a big deal. I personally need to study that more, because I've spent a lot of my time studying the gene editing side of it. But recently I've been really looking into recursion, ticker RXRX, because I have their CEO on tomorrow, I know this video is going to go live in about a week, but people can listen to the replay. It'll be recorded on my page. But their company is really exciting because it's like the number one company when it comes to tech bio. They just did a huge deal with Intellia. They're going to be a top 50. I forget what you call it, but like computer power.
Okay.
All their like Facebook, Meta now, Meta, Tesla, Google. Those ones are obviously in the top like 5 or 10. But in terms of biology, I think Recursion is going to be possibly number one in the world.
Okay. All right. So on the business side then, so you've mentioned Recursion. We're going to talk about a couple of other companies that you're interested in. But like, what is it that you're looking at when you're trying to understand what technologies are going to break through here?
Yeah, I mean, currently I have all my money into gene editing stocks.
Yeah.
But I'm very honestly, it's partly because I had a little FOMO. I got in a little bit. My averages aren't terrible, but I didn't expect the worst biotech bear market in history ever.
Just quickly, your finger is over the side
sorry.
of the camera. Perfect. Thank you. Podcast listeners won't care, but viewers might. But anyway, sorry, continue.
Yeah. So, once these stocks kind of recover, I could see myself possibly diversifying a little bit because there's some there's some companies that I'm really excited about what they're doing. Right now, all my money's in Intellia, ticker NTLA, and Beam.
Yeah, and so I guess the question is more like when you're assessing the marketplace, like you're interested in gene editing or biotech more broadly. Are you just looking at the numbers like any other business, or are you investigating the technology, making an assessment on what kind of paths these different companies are taking, what approaches they're taking to solving the problems that they're going after, or is it just you're looking at the numbers like any other business investment?
Yeah, it's definitely a little bit of both. I think that's partly why I have half my money in Intellia, half my money in Beam, roughly, because Beam's a little bit younger. So that's more of a potential, of the science. And then the Intellia is, I mean, they have the cure for HAE, which is hereditary angioedema.
Okay.
If anyone's familiar with that, if you've seen pictures with someone that has that, they have these attacks where their face or body just blows up huge.
Right.
Swelling attacks is what they call them. And they have a cure for that.
Wow.
I mean, yeah,
and the cure's out on the market now?
No, it's that one they've been dosing for 2 years now. Everyone's been safe. Everyone's completely attack free. That's why I call it a cure. They're going to go to pivotal trials in Q3 of next year, and it's supposed to be a very quick pivotal trial, which is good because that's one of the things.
Just to explain, pivotal trial.
Yeah. So in biotech, you have usually phase 1, phase 2, and then like a phase 3 is often called a pivotal trial because that is the one that determines if you get FDA approval.
Right. Okay.
For your drug. It depends. It's very tricky. Sometimes they do phase 1, phase 2 together. A lot of it depends on what other people have done, like competitors in the past. They try to kind of mimic each other in some ways. But I've learned the toughest thing about this. Intellia also has it. A lot of people call it a cure, but it's not really. It's yet to be determined. It's a very good treatment that appears to be best in class. ATTR amyloidosis, it has this protein that kind of accumulates. There's a cardiomyopathy version and a polyneuropathy version. There's 2 different versions.
Cardiomyopathy and
polyneuropathy.
Polyneuropathy. Okay, so
Yeah,
they sound like quite different things.
yeah.
Cardiomyopathy
Cardio's more
would be to
more
do
of
with
the
the heart,
heart.
presumably, and neuropathy, I guess, is polyneuropathy, multiple nerve issues.
Yeah, it's pretty much where this protein that's not supposed to be there accumulates.
Right. Okay. So they're two different diseases, but they're both related to the same protein, which this treatment is addressing.
Yeah, pretty much.
Okay. Okay.
And so they're doing those separately. The sad part for investors is cardiomyopathy is the big money one.
Right.
Um, and that one we just kind of found out it's going to be a very long pivotal trial,
Right.
like a 30-month pivotal trial. And 30 months might not sound like a long time, 2.5 years, but then you have to tack on like another year and a half for putting your package together. Then the FDA takes a half a year to decide. So you're looking 4 years down the line before it could possibly be approved.
Mm.
And in this market, that's why you see Intellia. It went to 200 back in the when everything was a bubble a couple years ago, and now
Yeah.
now now it's having trouble staying above 30. It's under 30 today.
Right. Well, buying opportunity, right? Not
Yeah, and
financial advice.
yeah, and 200 was way too high back then,
Mm.
but under 30 is way too low right now.
What's their are they what's the PE ratio? Are they I mean, are
Well, you
they
can't really
in
look at
profit?
PE ratios for these young biotechs because they don't have any earnings.
Don't have any earnings, right? Yeah, of course. Yeah.
But
Okay. Yeah, I was
they have
I
they
didn't realize it was so early for these that it's kind of that's
yeah,
not really even a
all the
factor.
CRISPR companies, the first ever approval was just on Friday. on
Right,
December
right,
on
okay.
December 8th. So they don't even have earnings yet. I mean, they show some earnings because they do partnerships with big pharma, and they'll get hundreds of millions of dollars. Like Beam got 300 million up front from Pfizer.
Wow.
And that was amazing because at the time base editing had zero human data. And it was for 3 targets that weren't even uh, worked up at all. Like, it's one thing to
Right,
get a bunch of money for something that's kind of already been worked on and maybe is in phase 1 or, already in the clinic, but these are just from scratch. So it really
right.
shows you the value that Pfizer put on base editing.
Yeah, yeah. Interesting. Um, yeah, and so I mean, like it feels like the potential here is insane, right? Like you can imagine a future where, if you've got really advanced AI that can take in huge amounts of data and come to intelligent conclusions about it, and then you've literally got a method through which you can edit the source code of humans, like, we're not just talking about curing disease here, right? We're talking about superhumans.
Yeah, the limits, right now, a lot of people like to talk about curing baldness. Like imagine how much money that's worth.
Yeah, yeah, Jesus. Yeah, I didn't even think about that.
There's
that was me thinking that we're all going to be like the Incredible Hulk, and it's like, no, 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 we'll just have hair.
Yeah, it's funny about when I first started getting into this, I was like, imagine if we cure baldness, imagine if we kind of like cure obesity. And then now
Mm,
obesity drugs are the number one, like that's all anyone in biotech can talk about.
yeah,
All these big companies like Eli Lilly look to make $1 trillion on obesity drugs.
yeah,
Um,
yeah. That's interesting, isn't it? I suppose you kind of, as as someone was keen to talk to you about this, is because I don't know much about it, but you sort of imagine that it would be about helping people, I guess, but actually the way the direction it's more likely to go in is where the money is, right? Like it's like any other market mechanics.
yeah, that's why you have things like the FDA and stuff,
Yeah,
because they're not going to approve of those kind of tests on humans for those, those kind of things like curing baldness yet.
Yeah.
They need, decades of data for these tough diseases, these really bad diseases. That's why it's very important to go after these debilitating diseases first to
Yeah.
kind of prove that it works. Then when you have 20 years of data, people are like, oh, okay, I might take something like that to have some hair again.
Yeah. 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 And I mean, look, I guess, people kind of poo-poo the idea of trickle down economics, but I guess you'll probably get to a stage where a lot of the technological resource and time will be focused on curing these serious diseases, which we would universally agree that that's a good thing. And then almost as a side effect of that, oh hey, by the way, now that we've done this, we know how to edit all of these other types of genes, and guess what? You don't have to be bald anymore, right?
Yeah, it's amazing. There's so many technologies that are coming together right now, like Pacific Bio, PAC-B is the ticker. They have this form of sequencing. You can see long stretches of DNA sequencing, which has huge implications to be able to like read someone's entire DNA. You can tell if, oh, you're prone to have this kind of disease or cancer, and we're learning every day. I swear I come on X and they find out what another gene is representative of. It's what we know right now is probably 2 or 3% of what we'll know in 50 years
Yeah.
about
Yeah.
the DNA. And we already can do so much, that's the cool thing about it.
Yeah. Yeah. So what does what's the vision of what the world looks like in 5 years, 10 years, 20 years, if this technology continues progressing in the way that I guess you hope it will?
Yeah, I think sometimes I get tired of some of the people complaining about the cost of some of these things. Like the CRISPR drug was 2.2 million was the price, but it their competitor priced it at 3.1 million, and their stock went down 40% because everyone's questioning, like, are they sane? Like,
So
why?
sorry, when you say the price for the drug, do you mean per dose
They, it's just one dose. That's the
or per
beauty of,
treatment?
yeah, and there's
Right.
only one
Okay. Yeah.
treatment. You got one
Right.
treatment for life, and you should be cured for life.
Right.
uh,
Wow.
for some of these things. Like I said, not every disease is a 100% cure. HAE is a cure. Um, the sickle cell is kind of a tricky one because I think there was 1 or 2 patients that might have still had some attacks or something, but for a lot of
And so
them,
this is sickle cell anemia, right? Which affects the structure of red blood cells.
yeah, and that's a crazy story in itself, like how sickle cell anemia even came to be. I mean, most people know it's kind of associated with Africa. And the reason that is because the human body adapted to try to fight off malaria.
Yeah, I
And
remember this.
it's kind of, people don't even think of the human body adapting. And you would think, well, wouldn't the human body adapt in a positive way? But the human body just does.
Yeah.
It just does things. It's not always going to work out for the best.
Well, I guess you can imagine, in the evolutionary pathway, some people will have evolved this mutation for sickle cell anemia and not died and lived but been unhealthy, and then everybody else got malaria and died. So what's the
What's
gene that continues
Yeah.
on into the next generation? It's the one that survived, even if they're not particularly healthy. So long as they can survive to the age that they need to reproduce, then the genes get passed on, right?
Yeah, and I just did a post, I think it was yesterday, on some stats for sickle cell disease, and
Okay.
it's pretty crazy. What was weird was ARK invested a stat, and they only said 20 million people in the world have it. But when I looked up, I found 80 million in Africa alone.
Wow.
That's by far the number one. India has 20 million by itself.
Wow.
The US has 100,000. Europe, I think, was 68,000.
Okay.
So, but people that are real bullish on CRSP, the CRISPR company that just got approval, they throw out, oh, these huge TAMs, like total addressable markets.
Total addressable market, yeah.
But they don't realize this drug is going to be a really hard sell. It's really expensive, so it's not going to be for, definitely not for people in Africa and India and stuff like that. The company said about 32,000 people are potentially, their total addressable market for this drug, which is a lot different than 120 million people worldwide, which is what I found was the total for everyone in the world that has sickle cell disease.
Right. And so this is CRISPR, the company. Are they just called CRISPR, or is it CRISPR something?
CRISPR Therapeutics.
CRISPR Therapeutics. And so this treatment edits the DNA of what exactly? Not every cell. Presumably, it targets the cells that produce red
Hemoglobin.
blood cells.
Yeah.
Hemoglobin. Okay, right.
There's some. They take out stem cells. And
right.
This process is a really extensive process. It takes like 5 to 6 months, because what they do is they take out some of those stem cells. They take them to a lab and do what they got to do with the CRISPR to fix those cells. And in the meantime, you have to take this harsh chemotherapy to get your body prepared for the infusion of the correct cells to come back in, so your body doesn't reject them.
Right. Okay.
And so that's why the chemotherapy can cause infertility.
Right.
And it's very, very harsh. I think Bluebird had maybe 2 people die in their trial. That's why they got a black box. A black box is when there's like an extra warning label for a medicine. CRISPR didn't have that, which is a little interesting, just because as far as I know, they both use chemotherapy for this.
Right.
I assume it's the exact same. It's called like busulfan.
Okay. And so that's to suppress the immune system to allow the new stem cells to be reintegrated. And the reason that you need to do that is because the DNA has been changed. So there's a chance your body would not recognize it as it
would fight them off.
Cells. Yeah. Right. So it would recognize them as having different DNA and therefore being a foreign body, and therefore they need to be attacked by the immune system. Exactly.
Yeah. And that's one of the things that I like about Beam with the base editing. It's why I'm invested in Beam. Is they also have they call it wave 1, wave 2, wave 3 for sickle cell disease. Wave 1, there's a lot of companies, including CRISPR and Bluebird, that just got approved on Friday.
Right.
And that's the tough 5 to 6 month process that we just talked about.
Yeah.
Editas is another CRISPR company that just showed some really good data at ASH. It's a conference. And Beam is supposed to dose the first patient for that same wave 1 type of thing this month. That's why a lot of people are, Beam's really late to the party on that wave 1 stuff, which is true. I don't really expect tons of money from that, even though their preclinical was the best of everybody. All their data points look better than these things that have already been approved. But what I like Beam so much is they appear to be number 1 on the wave 2 and wave 3 for sickle cell disease. And that's where you really start to expand that total addressable market. Because wave 2, it still has the transplant process, which is not best, but it does not have the harsh chemo.
Okay. And why is that?
Because they use base editing in like a really cool way.
Okay.
To I think it's called an epitope.
Okay.
This is, way high level.
Deep
stuff.
into the science. Yeah. Okay.
But it's just think of it as a really cool way to tell your body, oh, this stuff I'm putting back into is okay. Don't go attack it.
Right. Okay.
And it's really like a novel way of that they're using this base editing tech, and it appears really cool for investors. It's not quite an IND enabling. Before you submit an IND, which is so you can go into the clinic, you have to get to IND enabling, and they're very close. But investors in Beam are really hoping that it comes here pretty soon. That's one of the reasons I'm out of CRISPR, is because once you get a wave 2 drug or a wave 3 drug, all these wave 1 drugs are going to go to zero. Because who's going to say, oh, yeah, I'll take chemo over no chemo.
Yeah.
No one's going to do that.
And so, but the chemo version is clearly further ahead and closer to being rolled out more broadly.
Oh, yeah.
But the potential of wave 2 and wave 3 means that could be made obsolete before it becomes fully profitable.
Yeah, and Beam owns like 100% of all their drugs currently, and a company like CRISPR only owns 40%.
Right.
Of that one. So Beam,
and that's because they've been taking investment from big pharma
and from me, and from me a little bit.
Right. Yeah. But presumably you don't own any of the treatments.
No, but I own a lot of the stock.
Right.
But yeah, no, the CEO actually follows me, and
oh, sorry. And so this isn't CRISPR we're talking about now. This is Beam we're talking about.
This is Beam. Yeah.
So yeah. So I was just when you said that CRISPR only owns 40% of their.
That's CRISPR Therapeutics. Yeah.
CRISPR Therapeutics, and the reason for that is that the rest is owned by big pharma companies.
Yeah, Vertex.
Okay. All right.
But yeah, it was 50-50. And I think it was about 2 years ago, Vertex paid $900 million up front. Big number, plus $200 million upon approval, which just happened last week. So a total of $1.1 billion for an additional 10%.
Okay.
Which is good. It's a good number.
Yeah. It's big money, isn't it, in this space? I guess because it's such an expensive process to develop these technologies and bring them to market.
Yeah, the number one question I get is like, why am I out of CRISPR Therapeutics? Because that was my first one that I was in. That's the one that everyone, when they hear me talking about CRISPR, they just naturally assume I own CRISPR.
Yeah,
which I don't blame them. It makes sense. But that one I got out of because for a long time they weren't showing any in vivo. In vivo is when you directly put the CRISPR into the body.
Yeah.
And a lot of these early treatments are ex vivo, like the
process
sickle
that
cell.
we just discussed.
Yeah. And the amazing thing about in vivo are the margins are amazing.
Right.
And it's
okay, because there's less lab work.
Oh yeah, like you're talking. I'm just going to throw out numbers, but it could easily be over 20% COGS. COGS are cost of goods sold, which is pretty much affects your margins, right?
Yeah.
And those are going to be like over 20% probably for the sickle cell disease wave 1 that CRISPR Therapeutics has. And a company like Intellia, which is my other company, both of their programs for the HAE, the hereditary angioedema, and the ATTR cardiomyopathy, polyneuropathy that I mentioned earlier, both of those are in vivo.
Right.
And so they're super quick. You get the drug in a day, like probably in minutes. Maybe you have to stay.
How is it administered?
I believe it's just like an IV.
So or do they have to remove stem cells and then they give you the stem cells back, but there's no chemo, or it's
none of that. It's just straight. Wow. It goes right into your body.
Wow.
And that's like the future of medicine. Like being able to get a one-time treatment that doesn't put a Band-Aid on your ailment, but actually fixes it.
Yeah. You've got your
Oh,
Finger over the thumb again.
sorry. Just
No
tell me.
problem. All good, all good. Yeah, podcast listeners are going to wonder what we're talking about. Cool. I mean, so we've discussed CRISPR a lot. We've discussed Intellia a lot. We've discussed Beam. Any other companies out there that are potentially more early stage, or that you're looking into that you haven't taken the plunge on yet, that people might want to be looking out for?
I think Prime is a big one. The Prime editing,
Okay.
that's the CRISPR 3.0. The reason I'm
Yeah.
not in that yet is they have like 175 million in cash, very little cash,
Yeah. Okay.
and they're the farthest. They don't have anything in clinical trials yet. Next year they're going to do their very first one. So in this time, in this kind of, everyone expects them to get a really big payment up front, because they have 18 programs in their pipeline, which is unheard of. I mean, it's just not even possible that they're actually working on 18 things with the amount of money that they have.
Yeah.
But they have them, and that'll help them do a big deal with. They'll probably get 200 to 300 million up front pretty soon here, which will help a lot. But that's one that I have my eye on. There's not much to say about that one, so I'll probably talk a little bit more about Intellia and Beam, maybe the two that I am in.
Yeah. Okay. So I mean, what else do we need to know about them then? I mean, what's exciting that's coming up that you're excited about?
Yeah. I would say Intellia to me is the most undervalued of all of them.
Okay.
And it's, the analyst, I've had a tough week with the analyst this week, because it really annoys me when an analyst has a $75 target on something, and then the day of the first ever CRISPR approval, they drop something to $30 overnight. Wow. Like for no reason. No news came out, nothing changed. They just,
is it that they expect CRISPR Therapeutics to take more market share?
I don't know, because that was a blocked. I don't have access to what he said.
Right.
I listened to all the fireside chats, and they did have one in London, the Jeffries conference.
Okay.
Recently, and I listened to it, but for Beam, the exciting thing coming up, and recently we had the Gauche Great Ormond Street data, which it's not directly Beam, but it was the first ever base editing in humans, and they're using that base editing kind of at the liberty of Beam and the people that own base editing, So it was cool to see it in humans for the first time work out and cure. And then Verve Therapeutics recently showed base editing in vivo for the very first time in cardiovascular disease.
Okay.
And that, looked pretty good.
So it feels like we're really on the cusp here, right? Like there are lots of companies that are just starting to actually show results. There's investment that's ramping up, and like, are we going to get to an inflection point where the exponential really shoots up?
Yeah, I think
you see happening.
We had the bubble that occurred because everyone noticed like all these amazing things.
Yeah.
And the interest rates were like near zero.
Yeah.
So long duration assets like these that don't have the approvals and revenue coming in consistently are going to do well, and they got way ahead of themselves. But now these companies are all, pretty much everything's been positive. So a lot of investors don't understand. They're like, how can Intellia be 200 2.5 years ago, and now it's under 30? And all they've done is show more durability, dose more patients. It's been very positive. It's a hard thing for investors to understand. I think to answer your question, it's going to take, interest rates dropping next year are going to help. They're going to start making interest rate cuts probably. Also, the thing I worry about a little bit is CRISPR, like we talked about, is a really harsh process with the chemo and all that. CRISPR Therapeutics, that sickle cell program specifically.
Yeah.
CRISPR in general is not, I don't want to have people misunderstand what I'm saying. Just that one drug in particular. So I'm worried that's going to be a very slow ramp. So some investors might say, "Oh, you see, no one's taking this CRISPR stuff," so they might kind of poo-poo on the sector as a whole because of that. But I want people to realize you got to look at it drug by drug basis. HAE cure, in vivo cure from Intellia is way different than this harsh chemo 5 to 6 month process for sickle cell disease. That it's night and day different. And that's why the analyst, if you look at average analyst targets for Intellia, they're very high. The average might be like 70 something.
Right. And so is that 70 per share? How does that relate to like market cap? Because obviously it's, share price.
Yeah.
It's,
I think,
it, as a number on its own doesn't mean much unless you know how many shares there are.
Right. I think it's around 2.5 billion right now.
Wow. Okay. I mean, that's pretty significant for a company that really doesn't have any earnings.
Yeah, it's because the way you value, and that's the problem is, people don't understand that you can value companies by discounting future cash flows and giving a probability of success also, because obviously there's no guarantees that drugs, even if they look good, are going to get approved. The better they look, the better the probability of success. The farther out they are, the more you have to discount them.
Yeah.
But it's valuable. They have 1 billion in cash, so it's not like. That's why I like having my money in Intellia and Beam, because Intellia has 1 billion in cash roughly, and Beam has like 1.25 billion.
Right. Yeah.
And
so they're not gonna go kaput anytime soon.
Yeah, they're very, they're in a good spot. CRISPR has
Yeah.
like 1.7, 1.8 billion. CRISPR
Right.
has a lot. So
Yeah.
that's why I've held off.
Is most of this just investment from big pharmaceutical companies? That's why they've got so much cash on the books.
Yeah. Some of it's coming from like offerings that they've done. That's a really strong part of some of these, like Intellia did a really big offering when the stock was, when it made that push to 200, they did an offering around 135 or 145.
Right.
So they got huge, great valuation for that money. And I said earlier, Beam got 300 million up front from Pfizer. Beam also just got 200 million up front from 250 million up front from Eli Lilly. Okay. So Eli Lilly and Pfizer are two of the biggest big pharmas in the world, and they just got over $500 million.
Yeah.
From these companies. So
yeah. So they must believe in it. I mean, it's clear that sorry, I was talking to the mic. It's clear that the scope of the opportunity is obvious, I think, right? Like being able to edit the source code of humans, it's obvious how many insanely useful and presumably profitable applications that would have. I guess the decision making process at this stage is just who's got the best approach and how to mitigate those side effects, and the contingent treatments like chemotherapy, how to mitigate those best. But I think clearly, the scale of the opportunity is being recognized by the biggest players in the world, right?
Yeah, I think the next thing that we see is there hasn't been a buyout yet from big pharma. They've given a lot of money and they've partnered aggressively. Vertex, like I said, huge money to CRISPR for just 10% of that one drug. Regeneron has a huge partnership with Intellia. and Beam has some big partnerships with Pfizer and Eli Lilly. So the next big thing is once someone gets bought out, I think that'll really kind of start I won't say bubble again, but the positive stock performance. It hasn't happened because, for one, these companies don't want to get bought out, not at these kind of levels.
Mm.
And they have to, that's a lot of investors don't realize. Just because you get an offer doesn't mean that the company has to tell you about it.
Right. Yeah.
I used to think that it was kind of like lawyers and stuff, where they have to tell about an offer, but it's not true. I know someone that had I think it was Marathi or something. It was some company that just got bought out, and he was very unhappy with the price that they got, and they found out that they were offered like double or triple that in the previous years, but never told anybody.
Right.
So I think big pharmas like to partner right now because no one's wanting to sell. But I think as these companies kind of get closer to approvals, get a little closer to money, we're definitely going to see a buyout at some point.
Mm. Yeah, I guess they probably want to realize some of their potential before they look to buyouts, because they see what kind of growth in their valuation they could potentially realize over the next few years, right? As they bring more of these treatments closer to actually bringing them to market, there's going to be like an exponential curve on the potential value of the company as it becomes more of a reality.
What I like about some of these drugs, like a company like Intellia, you only need maybe 3% of the patient population to decide to go with the gene editing each year, and you make billions.
Wow.
You make huge money.
Yeah.
So it's, people act like, oh, are people gonna, because most of these diseases have some drugs already on the market, but they're not as good.
Yeah.
So it's a question of
And
like,
they'll presumably address symptoms rather than rewriting the
yeah,
DNA so that it's gone.
yeah. I mean, there is things like RNAi editing,
Okay.
but those are not one and done. They have to do it multiple times every year.
Right. Okay.
And those are like, some of them, not, it depends on the disease always, but there's some of them that are 500, 600,000 every year.
Right.
You have to pay. So it's like,
Wow. God. Yeah. It's a lot.
2 million, for one time is actually cheap when you think about, what it, so that's one of the biggest things that the bears talk about is, oh, it's too expensive. How is anyone going to pay for it? Well, their insurance is already paying for things that are technically more expensive.
Mm.
Not at a one time kind of, that's going to be the problem, to see how insurance deals with a large upfront expense. They might end up doing a kind of payment plan or something where they pay over a couple years instead of all up front, but it's yet to be determined on that.
Yeah. Cool. Okay. Well, look, I mean, the last thing I just want to ask you about outside of the business of this is the ethics of it. So it seems to me, I mean, I can't really conceive of anything that would be a huge ethical concern if it all goes right. I mean, we're just talking about treatments for very serious diseases that work and are comprehensive. Are there any ethical concerns that people raise in this space? Is there anything that maybe I haven't considered that we should be thinking about as a species?
Well, I think, a lot of people are familiar with the Chinese doctor scientist that he did some germline editing onto I believe they were embryos, to help them not have like HIV, to be
Right.
resistant
I
to that.
was not aware of that.
Yeah, and he ended up going to jail
Right.
for that, but now he's back in the lab, and every scientist in the United States hates him,
Right.
because they're all, not only do they have a lot of investments in companies in this space, but they realize how one drawback could really have a lot of scrutiny.
So what you mean is a rogue scientist
Yeah,
deploying some of this technology without approval could have knock-on effects on the whole industry in terms of pushing back the deployment of the technology by many years.
that's the problem, is this stuff is so easy. I mean, there's a lot of it's very complicated, right?
Mm.
But there was a Netflix documentary, Unnatural Selection,
Okay.
that really talks about the ethics, in a, because you have these biohackers
Yeah.
that are literally like in their garages testing on themselves.
Yeah.
That's, and they don't have PhDs or anything. But it's funny, but it's like, it shows you how hard it is, but also how easy it is. Like in the future, it's going to be very hard to, keep this stuff in check.
Mm.
I think a lot of the ethical stuff is definitely going to be an issue down the line, because it's like, how do you stop someone? Um, People talk about babies, designer babies, all the time,
Yeah.
right?
Yeah. Yeah.
If the United States bans that, someone will just fly to a different country.
Mm.
You can't
Yeah.
stop it. There's not every country in the world is gonna to probably ban it.
Yeah. And I
And
suppose with designer babies, it's like, well, there's a line somewhere, because if you said to somebody, okay, well, you can either have a baby that we know is not susceptible to any of the major disease that, in the future, you can either have a baby that we're 99% confident is going to be very unlikely to get any of the major diseases that we know about, or you can take your chances. For any parent or any prospective parent, there'd be no contest, right? Like this, the
Mhm.
demand, if that technology really becomes effective, affordable, and reliable, there's going to be no contest. So, like, yeah, good luck trying to regulate it if another country doesn't. Like you say,
Yeah,
you would just be mad not to, for the price of a plane ticket, and then whatever the treatment costs. As I say, if it becomes affordable,
Mhm.
then everyone would do it. So I guess that's the consideration is, well, yes, you're presumably going to have to say that that's okay, but then you get to the well, can we edit for traits? Is there going to be a kind of wealth inequality translating into a genetic inequality where rich people have super healthy, strapping, super intelligent children, and poor
right.
people, are still susceptible to disease and all the rest of it. But I guess that's a particular case, right? With pregnancy and babies. Like in the adult world, like, is it just really about? Is the ethical consideration really just about how do we set up a regulatory framework around this?
Yeah, and like I said, you can't. Anyone that's really determined is just going to go to a different country,
Mm. Yeah.
because it's tough, because you have people getting their hands on kind of making labs in their own, garage, and testing on themselves. Like the Unnatural Selection documentary talks about that a lot.
Mm.
uh I think right now that stuff is hard. uh it's not a huge issue at this point, but it's going to grow. The bigger ethical things right now are companies going after diseases that some people are saying shouldn't be going after right now. Like you shouldn't be, like, Verve Therapeutics is going after cardiovascular disease,
Right.
and a lot of people say is there really a need for that? Because you have things like statins and things that, as long as the people take the drug, they do okay. And then Verve argues, well, no one adheres to it. Everyone, life gets in the way and they stop taking their drug and then they get a heart attack.
Right.
And stuff. There's things like that. And that's why I've always been kind of not into investing in Verve, because even though I think the science will work and it'll kind of prove base editing, which is great for Beam, I don't want to be invested in something that, yeah, it has a huge TAM, but it's going to take so long for people to get comfortable with the idea of, okay, I'll take gene editing for my high cholesterol.
Yeah.
I'd much rather invest in something that, like HAE, hereditary angioedema. Can I see someone jumping on the opportunity for that? Yes. And I have a really cool story, again, on my highlights. Not to brag, but my highlights are pretty good. There's a woman, there's like some article on my highlights, and there's some woman talking about like a miracle. She feels like a new person. And that's all about hereditary angioedema. And she got that Intellia treatment, which is basically a cure. So anyone interested in that, totally read that article. It's super amazing. That's the kind of drugs that I want to, invest in, the ones that people are going to be jumping at, and the ones we aren't going to have to really work hard to convince people to take.
Yeah, I think that sounds like a wise strategy. I suspect it'll be like anything. You need the sort of, like the thin end of the wedge, you go specific before you go broad, in any line of business, you kind of prove the concept with something that is very specific and provable, and then you work outwards from there, I guess.
Just one thing that popped in my head real quick. There's a company called Loyal, and it's for dog longevity.
Oh, wow. Okay.
Yeah. And I had followed the CEO for a while, and she followed me back recently, and it's really cool what they're doing. I've had a lot of cool CEOs and things on my Spaces. I call it a podcast, but my Spaces, I do it almost every week. I'm going to take a few weeks off for the holidays and stuff, but I've had the CEO of Ginkgo Bioworks, which is really popular. DNA is the ticker, very popular stock. I talked about how
they got a good ticker.
Yeah, DNA is a good ticker. Yeah.
Yeah.
I had the CEO of Lineage Cell Therapeutics a couple weeks ago, and then Recursion is tomorrow.
Okay.
I even had Martin Shkreli, who.
Oh yeah. Okay. Yeah.
Pharma bro. He's notorious.
Pharma bro. Yeah. Yeah. Went to jail, didn't he?
He did. Yeah.
Yeah.
But
interesting guy. I love his X account. He's really good. He's like.
Yeah. He wasn't even scheduled to come on, but we had followed each other for a while, and he just came on, and all, my other listeners kept talking about, it was the most boring episode we ever had. They were starting to talk about bonds and stuff,
right?
Like investments. And then in my head, I'm like, okay, shut up. Like, I want to talk to Martin a little bit.
Yeah.
And I finally get them to stop and end up talking to Martin for like an hour. And my friends are DMing me and saying, is that actually him? And I'm like, yeah, that's why I was trying to get you to stop talking about bonds. But but the Loyal, I kind of got on a sidetrack. That Loyal for dog longevity, it's, big dogs live very short lives compared to smaller dogs. And the reason I brought it up is longevity, FDA is not going to approve of any human trials on humans, for longevity drugs, right?
Yeah.
So she is doing it with dogs.
It works on dogs. Yeah.
And they've already, I guess, sent it out to the hospitals, the vets, and they're like administering it, and they seem really excited about that. So that, talk about something that's going to make a lot of money. If
Yeah.
you if you tell people, spend a lot of money on their dogs, if you tell them, oh, you can have an extra 5 years with your dog,
Yeah.
that's a big thing.
Don't tell my wife. I hope she's I
Yeah.
hope she's that she does watch these, but she's not religious about it. I suspect we're over an hour in now. I suspect she's probably
Oh,
dropped by now if she is watching. But yeah,
perfect.
I love my dog. I love my dog, but I don't want to spend hundreds of thousands of pounds making him live for another couple of years.
I forget the price though. They made it sound actually very affordable. I think they're going for like a really mainstream
Okay,
kind of
all right. Okay,
pricing
well,
model.
maybe I might be in the market then. I'll check them out for sure.
Yeah.
Awesome. Well, look, it's been really, really interesting. I've been fascinated to learn about this space. I was really keen to get you on because I've been following you on X, and it seems like an incredibly exciting area of technology. So thanks so much for joining me. Where can people find you? I think we've called out your X handle a couple of times, but feel free to go for it again. And if there's anything else that you're excited about coming up, then call it out.
Just at Gene Investing. That's how you find me.
What days are your spaces?
It's usually on Wednesdays.
Wednesdays. Okay.
Because we've had the football, American football. On the weekend.
Yeah.
We used to do weekends,
not real
but
football.
yeah, you can't, in America, you cannot compete with American football on the weekends with a science podcast. It just doesn't work. But right now we're doing Wednesdays. Like I said, tomorrow's a really big one with the Recursion CEO, which is super exciting. A lot of AI and biotech coming together.
Awesome.
Yeah. And like I said, by the time this shows people, it'll already have happened, but you could listen to the recording.
Yeah, I'll once the recording's up, if you ping me a link, I'll drop it in the show notes so that people can check it out.
Sounds good.
Awesome. Well, look, Anthony, thanks so much for joining me. It's been great.
Yeah, thanks for having me, and let me know if you want me to come on again. And it was a pleasure.
For sure. Yeah, we'll definitely have you back. Take care.
All right, you too.
Complete.